mom was elsewhere, and I'm staying with my grandmother, and I didn't have a dad. It's hurt.
That is Terrell Owens, Hall of Fame receiver with 153 NFL touchdowns. Behind the numbers sits an absent father, 4 kids with 4 women, $80 million in bankruptcy, and a fall the public watched in real time. To understand the tragic fate of Terrell Owens, we start at the beginning. The wound beneath the talent. The boy who became Terrell Owens was born on December 7, 1973, in Alexander City, Alabama. His mother, Marilyn Hurd, was 17 years old. His father, L.C. Russell, lived across the street and never crossed it. Terrell was raised by his grandmother, Alice, the woman he called Mama. Alice was strict and protective. She forbade him from playing sports. She kept the doors locked. She did not let him outside to run with the other kids on the block. While she worked and his mother pulled double shifts at the local textile mill, young Terrell stood at the window watching other children play and cried. The poverty in the house was real. The loneliness was worse. At age 10, the wound deepened in a way that small southern towns specialize in. Terrell developed a crush on a girl in the neighborhood. He soon learned the girl was his half-sister. The man across the street was his father. The family in that house was his family. He had been ignored by them his entire life. Decades later, sitting across from Iyanla Van Zon, he put it in the plainest words you can.
My mom was elsewhere, and I'm staying with my grandmother, and I didn't have a dad. It's hurt.
That one sentence is the engine of everything that follows. The Pro Bowls, the Sharpie in the sock, the holdouts, the broken leg in the Super Bowl, the 4 kids with 4 mothers, the bankruptcy filings. All of it traces back to a window in Alexander City where a boy watched other kids play and asked himself why. His grandmother was not a villain. She was carrying her own pain. She would later be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and Terrell would spend much of his post-career life advocating for families dealing with the disease. But the protection she offered was also a cage. By the time she finally let him play sports as a junior at Benjamin Russell High School, he was already behind. He was also already built. He poured the years he had lost into every sport he could find. Basketball, baseball, football. He was 6'3" with sprinter speed and the kind of intensity that came from having something to prove every day of his life. Asked years later how the absence of a father had shaped him, he answered with the same plainness.
How do you think, looking back, that affected you growing up?
You know, it has affected me growing up because I never had that father figure in the household, you know.
That is the seed of the entire art. The boy who watched from the window, the athlete who would not be denied, the man who could not stop fighting people who, on some level, were not even there. Major college recruiters ignored him. He landed at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, a small FCS school far from the football factories. He played 3 sports there because that is what a kid with a chip the size of Alabama does. NFL scouts barely registered him. The San Francisco 49ers took a chance on him in the 3rd round of the 1996 NFL draft, the 89th overall pick, the kind of pick the league forgets about by Monday. He would never be forgotten again. Within 3 years, he was a Pro Bowler. Within 5, he was one of the most physically dominant receivers in football. By the end of his career, the numbers were staggering. 1,078 catches, 15,934 yards, 153 touchdowns, 6 Pro Bowls, 5 first-team All-Pro selections, a spot on the NFL All-Decade team of the 2000s. He retired top 3 all-time in receiving touchdowns. But the wound did not leave. The wound paid for the talent. Every coach who pushed him, every quarterback who underthrew him, every executive who tried to nickel and dime his contract, on some level, all of them were the man across the street who never came over. And the higher he climbed, the louder the grievance got. That is the tragedy in its earliest form. It was not that Terrell Owens lacked talent. The pain came first, and the talent was the response. And the response eventually would grow too big for the man who carried it. In order to understand how that pain transformed into one of the most explosive careers the NFL has ever seen, we need to take a look at the on-field rise that turned a quiet Alabama kid into one of the loudest stars in football. Stardom, spectacle, and a screw in his leg. The first 3 seasons of Terrell Owens' career in San Francisco were a slow build. He sat behind Jerry Rice, the greatest receiver who ever lived, and learned what professional preparation actually looked like. He absorbed everything. He worked himself into the kind of cartoon physique receivers are now expected to have but rarely possessed in the late 1990s. 6'3", 226 pounds of sculpted muscle, sub 4.5 speed, and the upper body strength of a linebacker. He benched 225 pounds for reps that would make today's combine prospect prospects flinch. He was, by any honest measurement, a freak of nature. Then came the moment that turned him into a star. January 3rd, 1999, NFC wildcard playoffs. The 49ers versus the Green Bay Packers at Candlestick Park. The Packers, led by Brett Favre, had knocked San Francisco out of the playoffs 3 years in a row. Owens spent most of the game dropping passes, 4 of them, looking shell-shocked and ready to be remembered as the GOAT in the worst sense of the word. With 3 seconds left, the 49ers down 27-23, Steve Young threw a back shoulder dart between 3 Packers defenders. Owens caught it in the back of the end zone, absorbed the hit, and held on. The play became known as the Catch-2, a deliberate callback to Joe Montana's famous throw to Dwight Clark, and it announced T.O. as a clutch, fearless playmaker who could redeem himself in real time. He never looked back. The next 2 seasons, he became one of the most productive receivers in the league. Then on December 17, 2000, against the Chicago Bears, he did something nobody had ever done. He caught 20 passes for 283 yards in a single game, setting an NFL single-game record for receptions that would stand for years. It was the kind of game that should have been impossible. Receivers don't get force-fed 20 footballs in a regulation NFL game, but T.O. ran routes like he was being chased by something invisible. By the early 2000s, he had transformed into one of the most physically intimidating wide receivers in football. He also became one of its most theatrical. After a touchdown in Dallas in 2000, he ran to midfield and stood on the Cowboys' star, arms spread, soaking in the boos of 65,000 fans. He did it twice. Cowboys safety George Teague flattened him on the second one. Owens did not care. The point had been made. He had been ignored his whole life. He would never be ignored again. Then came the Sharpie game, September 2002, a Monday Night Football game in Seattle. After a touchdown, Owens pulled a Sharpie marker out of his sock, signed the football mid-celebration, and handed it to his financial advisor in the stands. The crowd lost its mind. The league lost its mind. The image went everywhere. It was harmless, it was funny, and it was a perfect summary of Terrell Owens, a man who had thought of everything in advance, who refused to be small, who needed the moment to belong entirely to him. Then came the Super Bowl that defined his legend. In December 2004, while playing for the Philadelphia Eagles, Owens fractured his fibula and tore ligaments in his ankle. Doctors told him he was done for the year. A screw was inserted into his leg. Recovery was projected at 8 to 10 weeks, which meant Super Bowl 39 was off the table. He showed up 6.5 weeks after surgery, against the wishes of his surgeon, against the wishes of the Eagles medical staff, and turned in a performance for the ages. 9 catches, 122 yards, against the New England Patriots' top-ranked defense, on a leg that still had hardware in it. The Eagles lost the game 24-21, but the legend of Terrell Owens was sealed forever. He pointed out afterward that the conversation around him was strange. When Brett Favre played hurt, people called him a warrior. When Owens played hurt, people called him selfish. He was not wrong. The double standard was real, and he was one of the first NFL stars willing to say it out loud. Through the early and mid-2000s, his numbers piled up across 3 teams: the 49ers, the Eagles, the Dallas Cowboys, then the Buffalo Bills, then the Cincinnati Bengals. He finished with 1,078 receptions, 15,934 receiving yards, and 153 touchdown catches, placing him second all-time in receiving yards behind Jerry Rice and third all-time in receiving touchdowns. 5 first-team All-Pro selections, 6 Pro Bowls, a spot on the NFL's 2000s All-Decade team. He was, by any measure, one of the 10 greatest receivers ever to step on an NFL field. But the same fire that fueled the legend was already burning the legend down. The Sharpie in the sock and the star stomp were the fun parts of a personality that would, eventually, get him kicked off every team he played for. The driven man who could not be ignored was about to become the impossible teammate who could not be tolerated. In order to understand how a Hall of Fame talent burned through 3 rosters in 5 years, we need to take a look at the feuds, the holdouts, and the locker room explosions that earned Terrell Owens the most exhausting reputation in football. The diva era, and the bottom falling out. The trouble started in San Francisco. By 2003, Owens was a 4-time Pro Bowler, earning roughly $4 million a year, which by the era's standards was real money but not elite receiver money. He wanted out. He had clashed with new head coach Dennis Erickson. He had clashed with quarterback Jeff Garcia, and he had given an interview to Playboy magazine that, depending on how you read it, implied questions about Garcia's sexuality. The Niners locker room fractured. The front office grew sick of it. The whole thing exploded into a multi-team arbitration battle in 2004 when his agent missed a filing deadline that should have made him a free agent. He was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles after a messy arbitration battle. The era of T.O., the malcontent, had officially begun. For one beautiful season, the Eagles' experiment worked. He showed up in Philadelphia in 2004, caught 14 touchdowns in 14 games, played the Super Bowl on a screw, and tore the league apart. The image of Owens doing sit-ups on his lawn, abs glistening, while ESPN cameras rolled, became the defining picture of the modern NFL contract dispute. He wanted his deal redone. The Eagles refused, and he made sure the Eagles paid for it in public. The feud with quarterback Donovan McNabb is the one that became eternal. Owens criticized McNabb for getting tired in the Super Bowl. He suggested the team would be better with Brett Favre. He accused McNabb of being two-faced. He got into a physical fight with retired Eagles defensive end Hugh Douglas in the training room. He called the team classless. By mid-season of 2005, head coach Andy Reid had suspended him for the rest of the year, deactivated him, and ultimately the Eagles cut him entirely. McNabb would later say Owens had broken up a contender. Owens would say McNabb was jealous. The truth, like most truths in football, sat somewhere in the middle. The team had been on the verge of a dynasty. Owens had been the wide receiver they had been missing for 10 years, and the whole thing imploded in 12 months. He landed in Dallas in 2006. The fit was supposed to be perfect. T.O., the man who had once stomped on the Cowboys' star at midfield, was now wearing the star on his helmet. He celebrated his first touchdown as a Cowboy by doing the Sharpie all over again. He posted 3 big seasons. He also imploded again. By 2008, head coach Wade Phillips and quarterback Tony Romo had grown weary of the same recurring locker room drama, and the Cowboys released him. Then came the moment that made everyone stop laughing. September 27, 2006. Police were called to Owens' Dallas home. The initial police report, citing his publicist as a witness, said Owens had attempted suicide by overdosing on hydrocodone painkillers. An empty bottle had been found. The 911 tape was leaked. Owens, his publicist, and the team disputed the report almost immediately, saying it had been an allergic reaction to a supplement combined with prescription pain medication after a recent surgery. The official account, the one Owens has stuck with ever since, is that it was an accidental adverse drug reaction, not a suicide attempt. What is undeniable is that the man who had been one of the loudest personalities in football was found by paramedics in distress, and the league briefly remembered that the cartoon character was a human being underneath the celebrations. The drama did not stop. The reputation calcified. By the time he was bouncing between the Buffalo Bills in 2009 and the Cincinnati Bengals in 2010, his career was running on fumes. He was still productive, he was just exhausted. Then came the Hall of Fame snub. Despite being statistically one of the 10 greatest receivers in NFL history, Owens was passed over in his first 2 years of eligibility. The voting body had effectively held his personality against his candidacy. When he was finally elected on the 3rd ballot in 2018, he announced he would not attend the induction ceremony in Canton. He held his own celebration at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, his old college, instead. He said being snubbed in his first year had disappointed him. Being snubbed in his second year had disrespected him. He was not going to show up at Canton and pretend nothing had happened. The boycott was vintage Terrell Owens. It was a man refusing to be small. It was also a man who could not let a grievance go. Both things were true. Both things had been true since the window in Alexander City. The on-field legacy was secure. The bank account, however, was not. And while Owens was fighting the Hall of Fame and the media and the Eagles and the Cowboys and the world at large, a fortune that had once exceeded $80 million was quietly collapsing into one of the most cautionary financial implosions in modern sports history. In order to understand how a man who had earned nearly $80 million in NFL salary ended up in bankruptcy and nearly faced jail time for unpaid child support, we need to take a look at the money and where it all went. The money, the mothers, and the mirror. Terrell Owens made roughly $80 million in NFL salary across 15 seasons. Outside income pushes the lifetime number even higher when you include endorsement deals, appearances, and one-off side project. By every reasonable expectation, he should have retired with a generational fortune. By 2012, he was working out for indoor football leagues, sleeping in spare rooms, and watching his credit score drop into the 500s. The collapse had many fathers. The first was lifestyle. Owens admitted on a 2000 2012 episode of Dr. Phil that he owned multiple homes, a fleet of luxury vehicles, and an entourage that did not pay for itself. He framed the spending in the language every former pro athlete eventually uses, that the money felt infinite at the time. He explained in the same breath that the cars and houses had been bought during the absolute peak of his earning power. He maintained that the multiple properties were investments rather than indulgences, a defense he would repeat in court filings and television interviews for years. The investments did not save him. The second father of the collapse was advisors. Owens claimed publicly on Dr. Phil and elsewhere that his financial advisors had mismanaged the bulk of his fortune while he focused on football. There was truth in the claim. There was also a glaring admission buried inside it. He had not been paying attention. He had handed his money over to people. They lost large portions of it, and the statements went unchecked. Multiple advisors were eventually sued. Properties were lost to foreclosure. The IRS placed liens against him. Bankruptcy was the natural endpoint. The third father of the collapse, and possibly the heaviest, was child support. Owens had 4 children with 4 different women. By the early 2000s, his combined court-ordered monthly child support was reportedly running between $44,000 and $50,000 a month. That is not a household budget. That is a small business payroll. He was hit with contempt motions, jailable arrears, and emergency lump sum payments to stay out of custody. He was a Hall of Fame talent fighting a war on 3 fronts, managing a collapsing portfolio, an aggressive IRS, and a family court system that was not interested in his comeback attempts. The reckoning was televised. In September of 2012, 3 of the 4 mothers of Owens' children appeared together on Dr. Phil's daytime show. The episode, branded Daddy Drama, became one of the most watched episodes of the program's season. The mothers accused Owens of being inconsistent with payment, absent on birthdays, missing on Christmases, and sporadic in his physical presence in his children's lives. They accused him, in not so many words, of being the same kind of father he had grown up without. Owens, sitting across from them, was rattled. He tried to explain the financial situation honestly. He went on to describe the specific dollar amounts of those voluntary increases, walking the studio audience through the numbers as if they would somehow carry weight with a national audience already convinced of his neglect. The mothers were not impressed. They pushed back hard. The exchanges were painful to watch even by the standards of daytime television. Owens broke down at one point, openly emotional about the death of his grandmother and the collapse of the family structure that had held him together since childhood. The audience saw, for the first time in many years, the boy at the window beneath the Hall of Fame resume. What made the episode so devastating was not the accusations themselves. The devastating part was the symmetry. The man who had grown up watching his own father ignore him across the street was now being accused on national television of being a father his own children could not reach. The cycle was not just a cliche in his case, it was the entire structural pattern of his adult life. The financial collapse continued. By 2012, he was suiting up for the Allen Wranglers of the Indoor Football League, where the going rate was a far cry from the Sunday paychecks he had grown accustomed to. He chased one final NFL comeback. Teams politely declined. The receiver who had finished his career 3rd all-time in receiving touchdowns could not get a roster spot. A lot of athletes who go through what Owens went through never reappear in public. They retreat, they disappear, they lose the fight. Owens did the opposite. He started slowly and unspectacularly to climb back. His relationships with his children gradually improved over the next decade. His daughter, Kylie Owens, went on to play volleyball at Prairie View A&M. His son, Terrell Owens, became a wide receiver in his own right. There was, by the late 2000s, the beginning of repair. But the repair was always going to be partial. The wound the boy had carried out of Alabama had been passed down to his own kids in slightly different shape. That is the deepest sense in which the word tragic fits Terrell Owens. Not that he failed, but that he repeated something he had spent his whole life running from. In order to understand how the boy at the window became a man in his 50s who is still hustling, still rebuilding, and still refusing to fade quietly, we need to take a look at where Terrell Owens stands today. The comeback nobody saw coming. Terrell Owens is 52 years old as of this recording. By the standards of football comebacks, retirements, and reinventions, he should have disappeared a decade ago. He has not. He has done something far more interesting. He has gotten older without slowing down, and he has done it in front of a generation of athletes who quietly study him without admitting it. The post-football life he has built is unrecognizable from the financial wreckage of 2012. He runs a wine label called 81 Wines, an obvious reference to the jersey number he wore on his back, and the brand has carved out its own niche in the celebrity wine market that has grown louder every year. He runs an apparel line. He hosts a podcast. He does motivational speaking. He shows up at appearances, signings, and corporate events with a punctuality and professionalism that would have been unimaginable to anyone who covered the Eagles in 2005. He continues to model into his 50s with a physique that looks like it has not aged since the Super Bowl. He has spoken openly about the financial lessons he wishes he had learned at 25, and he has used the wreckage of his own portfolio as an in-demand financial literacy talking point at conferences for current and former athletes. The most surprising chapter, though, is the one absolutely nobody saw coming: pickleball. Owens has thrown himself into competitive pickleball with the same single-minded intensity he once brought to NFL training camp. He plays in celebrity tournaments alongside the likes of Dirk Nowitzki, and he has become a recognizable face in the sport's rapid mainstream surge. He has talked about pickleball not just as a hobby but as a business platform, comparing it to what golf used to be for executives, brand partners, and deal makers. The line is funnier than it sounds at first. T.O., the man who spent 15 years stomping on the Cowboys star and pulling Sharpies out of his sock, has become a pickleball ambassador in his 50s. It is exactly the right amount of absurd. It is also exactly the right amount of consistency. The same man who showed up to the Super Bowl on a broken leg is now showing up to corporate sponsorship meetings with a paddle in his hand, treating the sport with the same competitive earnestness he brought to every previous arena. He has business partnerships spanning multiple categories and continues to evolve through 2026. He has been a brand ambassador for athletic and recovery product. He maintains an active social media presence that mixes throwback NFL footage with current workout clips, family moments, and pickleball matches. The legacy questions, however, have not gone away. The Hall of Fame snub is still a piece of his story that pops up in interviews. He has not softened on it. He still feels he was right to skip Canton in 2018, and he has used the experience as a talking point about how voters and gatekeepers treat outspoken black athletes. Some people in the football world have come around to his framing. Others still defend the original vote. Both reactions are part of the long tail of the same conversation, and it is not going anywhere. The chaos has not entirely vanished either. In 2023, Owens was struck by a car in Calabasas, California after an argument at a pickup basketball game. The driver, by Owens' account, deliberately hit him with the vehicle after the verbal exchange escalated. Police investigated the incident as a potential assault. Owens, in characteristic fashion, came away without major injury and a viral news cycle that lasted exactly 48 hours. The fact that the first major headline about him in 2023 involved a Calabasas parking lot argument is a perfect summary of his post-football life. The drama still finds him. He still walks away from it. So what is the verdict on the tragic fate of Terrell Owens? The word tragic, in a strict literary sense, applies. His arc has the structure of classical tragedy. A talented man with a wound he did not heal. The wound drove him to greatness. The wound also drove him to demolish nearly every team relationship, financial structure, and family connection he had. The wound was so deep he passed pieces of it down to children of his own. The downfall came from the inside. The fortune disappeared. The family fractured. The Hall of Fame had to be dragged into his name on the third ballot, and he refused to walk into Canton when it finally did. But the word tragic also has its limits when applied to a man who is still standing. He did not die young. He did not vanish into addiction. He did not become a true crime cautionary tale on a Sunday night podcast. He bottomed out, looked the bottom in the face, and started climbing. He is, as of 2026, doing something that very few athletes of his caliber and his level of public chaos have ever pulled off. He is aging into a kind of second act elder statesman, complete with a pickleball career, a wine label, and an unflinching public reckoning with the financial mistakes that nearly broke him. Terrell Owens remains polarizing. Some people will never forgive him for the Eagles. Some Philly fans will never forgive Philadelphia for what they did to him. The arguments are not going anywhere, and he, characteristically, does not seem to care. He is, in the end, the boy who watched the world through a window in Alabama. He is also, in the end, the man who refused to let the window close on him. The tragic fate of Terrell Owens is real, and the comeback from it is also real. Both things are true at the same time. The boy at the window finally got outside, and he is not going back in. If you enjoyed this video, click on any of the cards on your screen.